Hi, you can see that I'm back in my office here. This is video 2 of a series of 3 videos. So in this video, addressing your personal health profile, I want to discuss blood sugar or blood glucose, carbohydrate foods, weight management, metabolic syndrome, and how to safely use cheat foods so that you can have some indulgences without actually sabotaging your whole wellness effort. So I want to start with your fasting blood glucose level, your fasting blood sugar level, which is 5.8 millimoles per liter. So that's pretty high because for the best data we have says that for longevity and healthy life expectancy, you want to have a fasting blood sugar that's below 4.7. You're at 5.8. So maybe we don't get it down to 4.7, but if we can get it down to 5.0 or less, or under 90 milligrams per deciliter. So in the United States, rather than using these millimole units, they use milligrams per deciliter. So our goal is to get you down to 90 milligrams per deciliter. So even though your present 5.8 millimoles per liter is not in the diabetic range, it is in the pre-diabetic range. And with that comes a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, a greater risk of future onset Alzheimer's disease, because it produces inflammation in the brain. It also produces inflammation in the blood vessel wall, which also can increase risk of heart attack and other vascular problems. So the trick with carbohydrates is to consume the amount of carbohydrates that your body needs on any given day based on how much you're burning. It's kind of like your cell phone. So if you use your cell phone a lot through the day, you're drawing down on the battery energy store. And so you have to plug it in and charge it for a longer period of time. You have to replenish that energy. Same thing with your body when it comes to carbohydrates. Your body stores about 24 hours worth of carbohydrates in your liver. And the more active you are, the more it releases that carbohydrate, and the muscles and tissues use it up, the more carbohydrate you have to eat to replenish your carbohydrate stores. But if you're not, so in the days when you were a marathon runner, let's say, you're draining the carbohydrate fuel tank in your liver and your muscles as well, and you have to eat more carbs to reconstitute that in order to have the energy to do it again the next day. And when you're eating like that, your blood sugar is not rising because your tissues are using it. But if you're moving to a more sedentary lifestyle and you're not running marathons anymore, then carbohydrate depletion usually is not nearly as great, so you don't have to eat as many carbohydrate foods. So the more active a person is, the more carbohydrates they're going to have to eat to reconstitute their carbohydrate stores. As people get older, they tend not to have that level of activity. So let's just explain how carbohydrates get digested and utilized by the body. When you eat carbohydrate foods, they get sort of digested in the gut into simple carbohydrates, and then they all travel through the bloodstream to the liver. Now, once in the liver, all the carbohydrates that you consume are converted into glucose, which is the one common carbohydrate that all the cells will use. And the liver will then send some of the glucose out into the bloodstream for the cells of the body to pick up and use as a source of energy. And the brain and the nervous system and your red blood cells use glucose exclusively as their source of energy. So if blood sugar is dropping, then your brain gets involved and you can't concentrate, you can get irritable, it becomes more difficult to function. So low blood sugar can really play havoc with the brain. The other thing is that as the glucose is traveling through the bloodstream, muscles can pick the glucose up if they need it. If you're physically active, they'll pick it up. But muscles will also store some of the glucose in their carbohydrate fuel tank. We call this glycogen. And then when you're doing more moderate and high intensity activity, it's like a second source of high octane fuel that they can use. But if of the 600 muscles of the body, if you're not using them that much, then they don't pick up a lot of carbohydrates because their battery or their fuel tank of carbohydrates is already repleted. You haven't really drained it that much if you're not being physically active to a significant degree. And the liver is able to also store some carbohydrates, as I was saying. And the liver can store 24 hours worth of carbohydrates in its own little glycogen fuel tank. And between meals, as blood sugar drops, as the cells use the glucose up, it releases a little bit of carbohydrate every minute to maintain blood sugar so the brain can function and other cells can function. And then after 24 hours, if you don't eat any carbs, then you go into a ketogenic state. We're going to try to avoid a ketogenic state. It's not fun to be in one. Now, if you overconsume carbohydrates, after you've replenished the carbohydrate fuel tank, the blood sugar level is what it needs. The muscles don't need any more carbohydrates. If you overconsume carbs, then the liver has no choice then but to convert the extra carbohydrates into fat. And it's going to store those fats in the fat cells, and the fat cells get larger. And in order to transport those fats from the liver to the fat cells, as you remember from the last video, the liver has to turn on cholesterol to help transport the fat. So cholesterol levels go up a little bit as well. And as the carbohydrates are being converted into fat, they're being converted into a special kind of fat called triglycerides. And your triglycerides are sort of just borderline high. You're just on the cusp of your triglycerides being high. So it's likely that the carbohydrate intake that you're having is raising both your blood sugar level, and it's also raising your triglyceride level. And we're seeing both. And as you put more of that fat into the fat cell, that used to be carbohydrates, now converted to fat, and the fat cells get larger, it creates insulin resistance. So now it's harder to get glucose to go into the muscle cells and the fat cells of the body. And the fat cells and the muscle cells of the body are 2/3 of the entire body mass. Of all the cells you have, 2/3 of your cells are muscle cells and fat cells. And in order to get glucose to go into those cells, insulin needs to activate what's called the GLUT4 transporter to open up the door so the glucose can get in. So when your fat cells get larger and you're not physically active enough, you have insulin resistance, and the GLUT4 transporter doesn't work very well, so the pancreas has to secrete much higher levels of insulin to open the door so the glucose can get in. With that insulin resistance, we tend to see higher blood glucose levels, which are showing. Insulin is secreted to a higher level, and then insulin encourages the liver to convert more carbohydrate into fat. Triglycerides go up. We're seeing that pattern. The triglycerides get stored in the fat cells are a little larger, and we end up with that kind of insulin resistance and more difficulty in getting glucose down, getting body fat down. So without adequate physical activity, you have to really restrict your carbohydrate intake. So that's not fun to restrict your carbohydrate intake to a significant degree. So in your case, I'm going to make some recommendations around activity. So the first thing to realize is that you don't need to be running marathons or doing any of these elite types of things if you're not in the mindset to do that. And with the amount of traveling that you're doing, it'd be very hard to be on a schedule like that. The other thing to remember is that when you're first getting back to activity, I know that you probably do some yoga and other things, but we need to step it up a little bit. But the goal to have is that less is more when it comes to compliance. So my suggestion would be that you just set the goal at something that's really easy to attain to start with. And that is 20 minutes maybe of a low to moderate intensity activity, endurance activity. So for me, on days when I can't do a more extensive program, I like to just sit on a recumbent exercise bike. And then with a recumbent bike, you don't have to balance. Your feet are out in front of you, you're sitting back, very comfortable. Your hands are free. You can surf the internet, you can text people, you can watch a TV show or watch something else on Netflix. There's no balancing. The compliance level is very high with recumbent stationary biking. Now, if you can go out and just do sort of a run, jog type of routine for 20 minutes, that's also great. After a while, you might want to step it up to 30 minutes a day. But start with a smaller amount of time so that your compliance is good. And just low to moderate activity so you're not doing something that's going to be overwhelming, going to drain your energy, get you sick, get you run down. You want something that's going to be sort of your wellness exercise routine where you get into a really good positive mental state. So low to moderate endurance activity. When you do that, it lowers your blood sugar because now muscles are pulling the glucose out of the bloodstream, and it's draining the carbohydrate fuel tank in your muscles and in your liver. So now when you eat carbohydrates, it's going to spend time replenishing those carbohydrates, and it's not going to raise your blood sugar as much, and your carbs are not going to be converted into fat. Also, endurance activity increases the sensitivity of your insulin receptors, the GLUT4 receptors. So now you don't need to secrete as much insulin when you have a meal to get the glucose to go into the cells. When insulin levels are lower, you don't convert as many carbohydrates into fat. So as a result, the fat cells get smaller because there's increased insulin sensitivity. This also increases your cardiovascular fitness level, reduces risk of cardiovascular disease, and can also help to lower blood pressure. So what are the carbohydrate foods now to focus on? Well, the ones that are lower glycemic. That means the carbohydrates that get absorbed more slowly into the bloodstream and don't spike your blood sugar. So as much as you can, I'd suggest that you use peas and beans as a low glycemic carbohydrate. Remember that beans and peas also lower cholesterol. And they're a fabulous substitute for starchy carbohydrates like bread, pasta, rice, and potatoes. So wherever you can use beans and peas as a side dish instead of bread, pasta, rice, or potatoes, you're better off. It's something that I try to do. If you have to choose between bread, pasta, rice, or potatoes, rice is your best friend. It has a lower glycemic response and tends to not disturb blood sugar to the same degree. Also, using non-sweet vegetables and having vinegar with your salads, because vinegar also helps to lower blood sugar by slowing down the absorption of carbs into the bloodstream. And remember that the vegetables that you're eating, try to have at least one cruciferous vegetable a day, either broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, or turnips, bok choy, because they have tremendous anti-cancer properties. They're low glycemic, but they have great anti-cancer properties as well, something else to pay attention to. With respect to breakfast, 3 really good options to consider. One would be to have a non-fat Greek yogurt, add a high-fiber, low-sugar breakfast cereal, so you're getting lots of fiber and very few carbs. And that's a wonderful breakfast to have. It's low glycemic and it gives you some protein and calcium, probiotics. It's fat. You can add some ground flaxseed to it possibly. Another option that I like is an egg white omelet. So no yolk, egg whites, high in protein, with some dry toast, or you can put some jam on it. And instead of home fried potatoes, which they often would serve you, ask for sliced tomatoes on the side. Breakfast option 3 is the one I use most days, which is a whey protein shake that's low in carbohydrates, where you just add water and ice cubes, ground flaxseed, maybe 1 tablespoon, and then 2 teaspoons of creatine monohydrate. Here, creatine monohydrate has been shown to improve the action of the GLUT4 transporter to get more glucose into the cells, lowering the insulin response. It also helps to support your lean mass when you're exercising. And the ground flaxseed, of course, is great to help protect your prostate gland and to lower cholesterol, and the creatine will give you some added energy. So that breakfast option that I really like is a whey protein shake mix, right? Added just to water, no juice, ice cubes, ground flaxseed 1 tablespoon, heaping tablespoon, and 2 teaspoons of creatine monohydrate. Other carbohydrate sources that of course are good are other fruits and vegetables. And then try not to drink calories. So no sweetened soft drinks. Better to have water or bubbly water. And if you need to have a sweetened drink of some kind, in my opinion, sugar does a lot of damage. And I'm not saying that aspartame is the greatest thing, but if you need to have an artificially sweetened drink from time to time just to soothe that craving, I'd rather have something that doesn't have sugar in it. Remember that alcohol has a lot of calories. So drinking alcohol adds a lot of calories from beverages. So I don't know if you drink alcohol or not, but that can really disrupt all of this and increase triglyceride levels and weight gain. And so that means not having any juices, or if you're going to have any juices, dilute them with water or soda water. The one juice that I do recommend, 4 ounces a day, is pomegranate juice, pure pomegranate juice, because it does help to protect the prostate gland, reducing risk of prostate cancer, something that men should pay attention to. And if you're having coffee and tea, I think you drink different teas, have them without anything in there. No sugar, no cream, and just try to have them as a pure tea. And with respect to snacks and treats and how to cheat, the thing is we all cheat a little bit. So the thing to keep in mind around cheating and these indulgences is that sometimes you only need a small portion in order to really satisfy the craving. After the first 2 or 3 bites, often the real dopamine rush that is, giving you all that great flavor and satisfaction starts to really wane, but people tend to keep eating anyway. So try experimenting with smaller portion sizes. I think you'll find it'll just meet the need in the moment, allow you to carry on. So there's 4 categories of cheat foods: ooey gooey, chippy dippy, frozen desserts, and bars. So ooey gooey are like these pastries and desserts and French crullers and danishes and so on. What you want to do is have something that doesn't have all the bad fat in it. You want to have some carbs without the bad fat and keep the portion size small. So something like these hard biscottis are great. Eating just the top of a muffin, because you don't need the whole muffin, just the top sometimes will satisfy the craving. And angel food cake is mostly carbs and not a lot of fat. So you try to find things that have the carbs but don't have the fat attached to it. Same with chippy dippy things. Like people eat potato chips and nacho chips. They're a disaster. Lots of carbs and lots of fat. The idea is to have a smaller portion size, having things that don't have the fat attached to them, like pretzels, a handful of nuts, maybe rice crackers where you're dipping it into salsa, or you're putting jam on it, or hummus, or a little bit of peanut butter. Low-fat popcorn is a great option. Lots of fiber, not a lot of carbs, very little fat if it's low-fat popcorn. And then with frozen desserts, I'm not saying you would have these in your home, but if you're out at a restaurant and people are ordering dessert, then having a sorbet or a gelato or a sherbet is much better than having premium ice cream or pie or a piece of cake or some chocolate offering. And with respect to bars, a lot of people eat chocolate bars, which are a total disaster. It's not just that there's a lot of sugar in there, but the fat is a lot of saturated fat. So looking for some options in the bar category would be these small little nut bars, or maybe just half of a Cliff Bar, or half of a protein bar, something that'll just get you through the moment and allow you to move on to, you've satisfied the craving, now you can get through till whenever dinner time is. So the final thing I'll talk about here are supplements. So I want to keep this simple. There's a few supplements that really are very helpful in reducing blood sugar. So let's just talk about those only. Using creatine monohydrate. This is a powder now that you buy. A lot of athletes use it to give them more explosive strength and lean mass gains. But creatine monohydrate stimulates the GLUT4 insulin receptors so that glucose can get into the cells much more effectively. And so 2 teaspoons a day in a protein shake or put into your pomegranate juice will give you the dosage that's been shown to stimulate the GLUT4 receptor, so you lower the amount of insulin that you require. You use your glucose food as glucose fuels much more effectively. Fewer carbs get converted into fat. So I would do that immediately. The other really impressive studies show that getting cinnamon capsules, 500 milligram capsules of cinnamon, and taking 2 capsules 3 times a day with each meal really can stimulate those insulin receptors extremely well, lowering your need to secrete high amounts of insulin while you're trying to get your body fat down and get into exercise and change your carbohydrate profile. These cinnamon supplements can really work wonders to stimulate the insulin receptor on the cells, so they don't need as much insulin to be secreted. And 2,000 IUs a day of vitamin D is also going to be helpful. Your vitamin D levels are a little bit low, surprisingly, considering where you're living, but 2,000 IUs a day of vitamin D will also improve insulin function and insulin sensitivity in your case. So after you've seen this video, I will, as I promised you after the first video, I'll send you sort of a complete report that sort of gives you a document to refer to that will put all of this information together that you've seen in the first 2 videos to help guide your day-to-day activity. Anyway, that's all for now. I'll make the 3rd video and send it to you really soon. Hope you have a great day, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks.